in Northern Ireland?
Let us deal, first of all, Stephen, with the automatic pipeline of EU law. Under the Northern Ireland Protocol, EU law automatically flows in respect of a defined number of areas.
This is Section 7A. That's that pipeline,
and that's it covers. Let's not get the idea that that EU law has primacy in Northern Ireland. Last time I checked, Stephen, when we drive on our roads, we drive at miles per hour. Our currency is sterling. We have different fiscal regimes here. There are many huge differences between us and the EU. Most of the laws that are impacting our lives are UK laws. They are not EU laws. But EU law does apply in certain respects to the manufacture of goods in Northern Ireland. And under the Northern Ireland Protocol, any change to that law, any new law introduced in that area, automatically applied to Northern Ireland. What we have secured, Stephen, and this is important, we have cut the pipeline. The first thing and the first key element when we talk about the Stormont break is EU law no longer automatically applies in Northern Ireland. We have dealt with what was called dynamic alignment, and that has ended. So what happens? If the EU proposes a new law which would impact on Northern Ireland, Stormont has the right to say, no, we do not believe it's right that that law should apply because it would be harmful to Northern Ireland. There is then, the UK government then enters into a process whereby it will examine that law. It will consider its impact on the UK and its internal market, on Northern Ireland's ability to trade with the rest of the UK. Yes, because it's an EU law, it will consult with the EU in the joint committee because it's EU law we're talking about. But ultimately, Stephen, and this is there in the legislation passed by Parliament, so this is already passed, this is already approved by Parliament. The UK government ultimately has the veto and can exercise that veto and can stop that EU law.
This is why I'm grateful for...
And that is the way it should be.
This is why I'm grateful for you being in front of me today. Two questions around that, then let's move on. First of all, in that consultation which you've agreed will happen between the UK and the EU, you are banking on the UK, if we talk about the current administration, putting Northern Ireland ahead. If there was a fundamental disagreement with the EU, putting Northern Ireland ahead of UK-wide interests.
No, because...
So why would the UK back the DUP or the Northern Irish MLAs rather than protect the relationship with the EU and work it out with them?
Well, for start...
So yes, UK has primacy, but they're going to try to do it in consultation with, an agreement with the EU.
No, Stephen, because this is EU law, there is a process that enables a discussion to take place in the joint committee. But ultimately, the UK government has a veto over that EU law.
If they choose to exercise the veto.
That is written into the new arrangements that have been approved and passed by Parliament. Now, if we get a situation where an EU law applies that is harmful to Northern Ireland's place in the United Kingdom, and the UK government refuses to veto that law, then, yes, there is a problem, Stephen. Absolutely. And we would have to deal with that problem.
How would you deal with it? You can't walk out again?
Well, we would have to then seek a resolution to that problem. And there are new mechanisms that enable us to do that. There are new procedures that require the UK government to... engage with the Northern Ireland executive to deal with any of those issues.
Engage with them,
Stephen.
And to resolve. The decision is not in Northern Ireland.
And to resolve those issues. But Stephen, the UK government has a veto, which was not in the protocol. Stormont now has a say in the laws that apply to Northern Ireland. That was my mandate, Stephen. Read the 7 tests. That's precisely what the 7 tests said. I have delivered that. I have delivered a veto for the UK government. I've delivered a say for the people of Northern Ireland. That's what I set out to do. That is what I have achieved.
Well, obviously, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson is no longer the leader of the DUP, but that was the DUP's collective sell to people. And if you listen back to that, you will hear them say, we have cut the pipeline. Listening to that is the leader of the TUV, Jim Allister. Have we cut the pipeline in your view?
Sadly and absolutely not, because we wouldn't be having a discussion about how you stop EU law if the pipeline had been cut. It's quite clear that EU law in 300 areas has supremacy in Northern Ireland, And all the Stormont break does, and we'll soon know as a consequence of it being tested, is allows 30 members of the Assembly to ask the government to consider the law that's been brought in, to have discussions with the EU, and yes, ultimately, if they have the courage to do it, to exercise an effective veto. But it certainly does not give the Assembly the right to stop EU law. EU law flows automatically through that pipeline into effect.
Not according to the DUP. Listen to that interview. EU law no longer automatically applies in Northern Ireland. That's what the DUP told the people.
And in that, they were misleading the people, because that is not correct. And the very fact that it's now a Stormont break, which has to be applied, demonstrates that the Assembly itself does not have the power to decide the laws that apply to it in this area. And all they can do is say, please, sir, would you ever mind stopping the application of this law? They cannot themselves stop it. But I'm interested in and supportive of the deployment of the Stormont break, because I want to know, as the people of Northern Ireland want to know, whether the sales pitch that went with it stands up. And we will know in the next few months whether or not the application in this specific incident is of any value whatsoever. But this is the point. If it proves to be of no value, then what does the DUP do then? Because having told us that they'd cut the pipeline, having told us they devised a mechanism that could stop EU law, if it proves they can't and the Stormont break does not work, then what do? Do they simply return to being colonial implementers of foreign law? Or do they take a stand and say this is an Assembly which, when it can be overridden by a foreign jurisdiction, is an Assembly not worth having in these circumstances?
Your problem here in all of this is a fundamental one, which is you fight every day for Northern Ireland to remain in the UK and therefore ultimately to be at the control of Westminster. You don't want Stormont. You want Westminster to have supremacy. And your problem here, your fundamental problem, Jim, is there's absolutely no doubt that Parliament can stop this EU law. Your problem is you don't think Parliament will. So on the one hand, you fight every day for Northern Ireland to be under the authority of Parliament, and yet now you know you're in trouble. No,
Stephen, what I fight for every day is for the United Kingdom to reclaim sovereignty over all its territory. It surrendered in 300 years of sovereignty to a foreign parliament. I want that recovered. Now, the issue we're talking about is an evolved issue. So in the devolution arrangement, the decision on this matter should be made in Stormont, not in Westminster.
So you do believe in Stormont?
I believe in a Stormont that works. But I don't believe in a Stormont which is a colonial outpost for the EU, where it has to, in subservience, implement laws that other electors, those who are elected by others, make, namely in 27 other countries. And that's the kernel of the issue here. We are being subjected to a law not made in Westminster, not made in Stormont, made in a foreign parliament.
And it's up to the sovereign parliament that you believe in the House of Commons to decide whether they are going to accept that or not.
It's up to the government whether they will take heed of the expression of opposition by over 30 MLAs to this colonial rule from Brussels. And if they do, then they have the capacity to stop it ultimately. There's a protracted process. If they don't, then it will be a roughshod put upon the people of Northern Ireland. And that's why I come back to the point. If the Stormont break fails to be ineffective and useless in that regard, then what's the DUP going to do then? That's the real question, which ultimately will arise out of the application of the Stormont break.
Well, what do you want?
We'll soon see whether it lives up to Jeffrey Donaldson's salesmanship. I have little doubt it won't. But, you know, we all heard there what Jeffrey oversold in that regard. And now is a moment of truth as to whether or not the Stormont break amounts to what he claimed it amounts and cuts the pipeline. I don't believe it does, but we'll soon know.
What do you expect the DUP to do? If Parliament, if the House of Commons, if that democratic process within all of the MPs, if the government of the day decides, do you know what? No, it's okay.
Well, I expect the DUP to deliver what they told the people of Northern Ireland they had delivered, namely that the pipeline of EU law had been cut, that EU law could not be imposed upon us. If they fail in this, then it will be imposed upon us. And then they have a challenge. Well, having misled the people into believing it wouldn't happen, it now has happened. Are we going to be the serfs of Stormont who simply implement foreign jurisdiction? Or are we going to stand up and say, no, you will not do this to us, and we will not do it to ourselves, rather, and we will not implement a system whereby we do not control, cannot change, cannot make the laws that are applied to us.
But what does that mean? What literally are you asking the DUP to do? Do what?
Well, I believe the DUP surrendered the fundamental leverage they have by going back into Stormont. I think last week's vote in Stormont would have been very different if the question really had been, do you want Stormont back? If you do, then you must vote down the protocol. But instead, it was unionism that was on the back foot. And I believe that if we are put in a position where it's demonstrably clear that we are the serfs of Stormont, implementing foreign EU jurisdiction with no right to stop it and no capacity to stop it, then the DUP has to answer the question, are they prepared to be those serfs, or is Stormont then not worth the candle that is suggested? So
what you're essentially saying, Jim, finally, is the DUP should not have gone back into Stormont.
Yes. That's right.
There's no doubt that's what you're saying. And yet, over recent months, look at least the accountability mechanism that there has been for people in this country because there is Stormont. With the likes of John O'Dowd now being challenged as a local minister about the traffic chaos in Belfast, about Gordon Lyons being the communities minister being challenged, Paul Given, the education minister, being able to make local decisions and decide where money does and does not go, and being challenged about it. Look at that local accountability.
Yes, it's wonderful. Traffic chaos